moving on to Tesla Investor Day, that was a big day. I mean, I think it was their first ever investor day, to be honest. I think it was their first official like investor day. They've had like AI day, they've had, battery day, they've had, they have their annual shareholder
Their
meeting,
shareholder meetings.
but
Yeah.
this was the first investor day they ever had. And I mean, there was good. In our prep call yesterday. We talked a little bit about it. There's good and bad and confusing. There's three parts, sort of. I mean, why don't you kick off the good, Matt? Let's start with the good news and the bad news, I guess, or not. Not so good news, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, probably the most obvious one that everyone was expecting was the Giga Mexico plant. So they finally announced that, and I thought the way they did it was actually kind of funny. It was like after a break, and then it was like announcing Giga Mexico, and it was just like on this like slide in the
Yeah.
side. And I
Yeah.
was like, wait, is anyone going to like comment on the fact that they just announced this factory? And then finally they did. I don't know, 30 seconds later.
Yeah.
But it was just kind of funny. And the weird thing about that was, they were really mum with the details on like, timing or, like when when the first vehicles would be produced. And then the next day, Tom Zhu goes out and he's like, yeah, we're going to start right away. We're going to have like vehicles in 2024. We're going to try to beat the 9-month, construction
Yeah.
time that Giga Shanghai had. And I was like, why is Tom saying this, on his own the next day rather than in the investor day? So that was
Yeah.
kind of funny. I felt like the market reaction would have been a lot better if they just shared those details on actual investor day. So
Hmm.
it was kind of funny, I thought.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of the other thing, I mean, the most overarching theme was just the deep culture they have of cost cutting. That was so prominently on display, and as like a long-term shareholder, that was by far the most important thing. They're
Yeah.
trying to grow to 20 million units and a terawatt hour of energy. They really reiterated that goal. But you can't do that unless you move significantly down market, and the only way you can move significantly down market is if you can lower your costs.
Hmm.
And so they laid out, I think, an incredibly compelling vision of how they can do that by cutting costs, not only of the vehicle, but even of like their O&M, and how can we get better with doing, deliver a better product or service while cutting costs at the same time. And it's like, that's been one of Tesla's miracles, I think, if you look at their O&M growth compared to their revenue growth, it's like shocking how many times they've been able to cut O&M while growing revenue. And then, of course, it doesn't like cut. You can't cut forever. It's got to grow eventually. But the efficiencies that they are finding are just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So that, and the bot was super impressive to see. They kind of blasted over that, but I thought the amount of progress that they achieved on the bot in just a few months was super impressive. So I mean, overall, like as a long-term shareholder, I think ARK Invest had an email the other day that it said it was all substance and no flash, and I think that's
Yeah.
very much true. Like,
Yeah.
they were not at all trying to like pump the stock price. It was like a very clear, here's our like strategy in the very long term, and that was, I think it was an incredible vision that they painted.
Yeah. Credible vision, long-term conviction stays very high for long-term investors. And personally, as a long-term investor, my personal account, I'm very happy with Investor Day. I'm okay. I don't need the stock price to pop or whatever. Our fund that we manage is much more short-term minded. People aren't paying us just to hold Tesla stock for them, right? They can do it on their own. We're trying to get better returns and try to do things and time things. And it's a little frustrating if you're trying to, short term or medium term, do anything to, get a better return than just holding the stock long term, right? So it didn't have any short term, punches to really punch the price up of Tesla stock or boost the hype, or not hype, but just like there was no unveiling of a product. A lot of people thought they were going to talk about the Gen 3 platform was referenced on that invite, and we thought they'd talk more about it. They didn't really. They kind of skirted around it and just said, yeah, in the future we're going to have a Gen 3 platform. We're not going to show it yet, but we will in the future. But these are the things we're preparing to do to improve everything in our factory manufacturing process. It was kind of cheap, like a cheap punch. I felt like, I don't know, cheap punch is the wrong word, but it felt like, I don't know, it felt like a trick, like to hype things up, hype the investor day up for people that were hoping for some more. and then they just pulled the carrot away and like, nope, we're not showing you the carrot yet. Yeah, we referenced we were going to in the invite, but in reality, and then there's the whole hype of the investor day actual invite having that special graphics and stuff. Like what was that about? That I don't know. Did we ever find any make sense of that, Matt? Any of the theories or any of the things people found in that special visualization of the investor day invite, did it make sense to anything? Do you think?
Nope, not that I've seen.
Yeah.
But
That was just
so
noise then,
like,
right?
well, I mean, the most basic interpretation of that graphic was that it was all about like a very high quantity of cars, right?
Yeah.
Um, and that it was, but like then like why did they make it 3D? It's just
Yeah.
like
Might have do
they
some
didn't really
weird
talk
things to the
about
invite.
anything 3D at all. So that was
Mhm.
a little strange.
Yeah, and they referenced
Martin,
Boring Company and SpaceX, and that wasn't touched on at all in the presentation, right? So it did
yeah.
feel like a bait and click, right? That's what I see Carl Brangle. That's the right term, a bait and click. Yeah. Instead of a bait and switch, it was a bait and click, invite. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, Melody says I completely disagree with you. I mean, as a long-term investor, I'm very happy with what they said. Don't get me wrong. But as someone wanting to see something a little more flashy based on the anticipation going into it, like a short-term investor, if you're going to be a short-term investor, it was disappointing for sure. I mean, so there's two different mindsets there, right? So a lot of the Tesla community is made up of a mix of those two people, or some people are just the long-term conviction, foundation, first principles only investors that'll hold it for 10 plus years. And then certain people are only short-term minded, holding Tesla on margin, buying options. And then there's a big mix of, a little bit of both, and so I think if you're any part of the shorter term minded focus, you're disappointed to some degree, but depending how long term minded you are, you're pleased overall anyway, right? Something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I see in the comments Henry saying that Elon doesn't care about short-term investors. That is 100% true. So,
Yes.
like, that's I think why we urge caution around playing with options at all. We don't comment a lot about any trades that we make in the fund because it's so volatile and it's very hard to kind of get the timing right.
Yeah.
I think the reason we even play in this space in general, and it's like very easy to kind of criticize the strategy in a year like we've had in the past year where things aren't where the stock's going down, is that like, oh, you're just like short-term trading trying to like get ahead of things. But I would argue we're actually looking at the fundamentals and saying like the market is just wrong on earnings, and so there's outsized gains to be had if you can as long as you're not going crazy on like deep out of the money options or anything like that. Just assuming that Tesla continues to grow like they are.
Yeah.
So the kind of taking our option strategy out of it, the thing that I found disappointing was the kind of demand concern. And I talked about this a
Yeah.
little bit on Farzad's stream yesterday. I think it's like a legitimate question of like, hey, what's going on? Because the numbers out of China seem low. It seems like inventories are piling up. We just had another round of price cuts yesterday. But last week they were just saying, oh, there's no demand problem. We've got, Tom Zhu said something to the effect of, we have more orders than the Shanghai plant can deliver in China. And it's like, if that's true, why are we not seeing that in like the delivery data or in the inventory data? So
Yeah.
either it seems like there's going to be some huge wave of deliveries in the next couple of weeks, or it seems like there is at least some sort of short-term demand issue. In that case, like why wouldn't Tesla just be a little bit more upfront about that? That's the part that's a little frustrating to me, is they're like, trust us, demand's not a problem. I'm sick of talking about it. But
Yeah.
then like a week later they're cutting prices. There's just like a disconnect between what they're saying and what they're doing, it seems to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, can't they could show us some metrics if that's true, right? But they kind of don't want to show us the updated metrics of order backlog or something. I mean, Troy calculates it and estimates it, and yeah, it looks like there's a demand issue in some places, some regions, especially like Europe's fallen off. So, China, the deliveries have come down. Demand is infinite. I think that was a comment Elon said, and
Yeah.
that's like speaking hyperbole. I give him the benefit of the doubt; he's just speaking hyperbole. But I think he means like demand is incredible, and yeah, that I think maybe he means like demand is going to exponentially go up the lower we get the price. Of course, that's the case with anything with the laws of supply and demand, But are you going to keep cutting the price to eat into margins infinitely. No, at some point you have to stop cutting the price so that you still have some type of margins to reinvest into the business. And it's just
Mhm.
disappointing to both, I think, you and I, that they haven't experimented more with the advertising to reach audiences outside the Tesla Twitter sphere. eh, all the tweets that go out, all that, like all of us on this channel, all of us watching this, we're all aware of that stuff, everything that Tesla's doing. But the people outside of our bubble, which is, the vast majority of the population in the US, they have no freaking clue what's going on with Tesla. They just are told what they see in headlines of, autopilot crash feared or whatever, like safety concerns. They don't even know Teslas are the safest car on the road. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Can't we just educate the national population in the US that Teslas are by far the safest car in the road? Can you at least do that for us, Elon? I mean, that would be a huge win for everyone. Everyone. I mean, why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah.
Is it out of principle just to prove a point? Like, listen, I don't need to do traditional advertising. Look at us. We're going to make a historical case study of a business for people to study for years to come. I feel like that's where he's going, as opposed to just like, let's just do the right thing for the overall good of everyone to understand that the safety of the Tesla cars, educate the whole population that they're safer than everything else. I don't know. I'm getting
Yeah.
riled up thinking about it, but it just bothers me, irks me.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't want to just pile on Elon and the team because most of what I saw I really loved, but like I don't understand for the life of me why you don't just try spending $50 million in a variety of advertising channels, kind of see what works and what doesn't, and if the whole thing is a flop and it's like not a priority, great. Let's like at least we've got that data point. But like Elon was saying, they cut prices, and so they gained some understanding of kind of demand elasticity to price, and that was like good data to have. And I'm like, okay, well, why don't you try to get similar data points for marketing? Because
Yeah.
to your point, Emmett, there's still so much misinformation on like Tesla fire safety or like these autopilot crashes,
Yeah.
or like range anxiety is still a thing, which is hilarious to me because like people who own a Tesla
Yeah.
generally don't have any range anxiety for any situation ever.
I mean, the
So
bottom line is human safety should be number one and paramount. And I think Elon believes that when he thinks about it that way. And it is. It is number one and paramount. Like, Teslas are the safest statistically, and why not get the word out there so that, like, mom and pop who are outside of our bubble, when they're thinking about the next car to buy for their kid, like, who's aggressive driving like a BMW, or they're like, oh, let's get them a used Model 3 instead, like, it's, and save their kid's life when their kid's driving drunk on the road, driving off a cliff or whatever, like, it's going to save some amount of marginal lives if they just got the word out that Teslas are the safest. Like, I don't understand how Elon, he's the decision maker on here. I bet there's people in the Tesla team that would love to do this, but I think Elon is the final decision maker here, and we trust him for almost everything. He's not perfect. I trust him for almost everything, but this particular item, I think he's wrong, and I wish he would reconsider. I mean, just testing it out, the advertising, like you're saying, Matt, makes sense.
yeah, I mean, a lot of what they were focused on, I mean, they said it right from the outset. Like, let's not talk about anything in the next 2 quarters. And so I think their whole mindset, at least for that presentation, was in the long term, we have unlimited demand because we're going to be like by far the most cost competitive. And if you're looking at the details, it's like, yeah, like if you're going to lower your cost by 50%, so your cost of goods sold is going to be, I don't know, let's just be conservative and say $18,000 or something like that. Like nobody can really compete with that.
Hmm.
So I think their upside potential in the long term of getting to 20 million units is very
Yeah.
reasonable.
Yeah.
But at the
I see
same
Harry
time, like
Chu in the comments saying, sorry, to interrupt, if Tesla were to spend billions on advertising like Ford and GM, then they couldn't do a low cost car. That is true, but we're not saying like they could spend 50 or 100 million like and get a huge bang for the buck to test it out potentially. Just and then they wouldn't have to cut costs, price it. So anyway, go on, Matt, with what you're saying.
our point is that price cuts do cost billions of dollars anyways. Like
Many
if you're
more.
cutting your
Yeah.
average cost $10,000 and you're selling a million units, then that's $10 billion of like lost margin or cost, however you want to look at it. So it's not like price cuts are free. They're not. It's just what I would like to do is like try some different combination of price cuts and marketing spend and like find what's the right happy medium. And if advertising is a total bust, then absolutely, like,
Yeah,
don't do that anymore.
it's not going to be a
But
total
I think why
bust.
not just try it?
Yeah,
No, I agree, but
yeah.
I
I
just
think they're afraid that it's not going to be. Maybe he's afraid it's not going to be a total bust, and he's going to be pressured to even put more on advertising because it was such a huge success, like $100 million of advertising generated like a million new orders in the U.S. at full price with like maximum margins. And so once they have that, then it's like a no-brainer. They should continue it, and he doesn't want to go down that road. But that still doesn't make sense to me if you're saving lives by getting more people into Teslas than otherwise would be, outside of the Tesla bubble, especially, so
mhm.
it's just it's frustrating. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. So the other thing, in the long term, I loved their plan, but the one question I had on the longer term, we've spoken a decent amount about the short term, but Elon said they only need about 10 models to get to 20 million units. There was, I think even in that slide they showed, there were only two more cars that they planned on including. There's the Roadster too, but that'll be really small unit volume. But like, I think it's a legitimate question whether 10 different units or models can get to 20 million in sales, especially since some of those will be like S and X, which are not going to be like those like combined won't be more than 200,000 units, I don't think, in the long term.
Yeah.
So you're really talking about seven, like probably half of the 20 million is going to have to be like two or three models, and like that hasn't really happened historically. I think it certainly is possible, but it's at least a risk that I think is worth exploring in the long run.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely a risk. I'm not as worried about that as you are, Matt, to be honest. Like, I know Drew Dixon is also he's more worried than you are even about the number of models.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
if they have a really good Model Y and a really good Model 3 and they have a couple variants of it, like, maybe a hatchback Model 3 and eventually or something, and they have, two different ranges and trims for the Model Y and 3. I think if they're really good, they can sell many more millions than anyone would imagine of those cars, even let alone the Gen 3 platform. So they'd have to lower prices, obviously, which they'll continue to do. And I was really excited, like we said, about all these cost cutting measures they're doing with the manufacturing process, and that was all great stuff. I'm glad they educated us on, it's like Tesla Education Day is what I thought of it as. They really educated us on how they're doing it, which is stuff you and I had faith that they're doing all this time anyway. And so
Hmm.
a lot of people outside a lot of institutional investors who might have been drawn to the presentation, hopefully they were educated on, or hopefully open their eyes a little bit more about what is in the meat and potatoes of Tesla. Um, so, but the one thing just with a grain of salt is, I remember Battery Day, and it was a similar, educational event with the Battery Day, in terms of how they're going to get the batteries ramped up and the cost of batteries lower. And there's things in there, you believe it all, but and same with the way back the first AI day or full self driving day, we were supposed to have a million robo taxis on the road by now or whatever, all this stuff. So you just got to take everything with a grain of salt because some of this stuff will not come true, will not pan out, or it'll just take a much longer time period, whether it's the robotaxis taking much longer than anticipated, or with the Battery Day separating the lithium from the clay. That was a big point in like an
Yeah.
innovation like that seemed to, resolve so much, but it seems like that's not happening. So there might be something in this manufacturing process education day we saw that is not going to actually happen that we're all excited about. So just take it with a grain of salt. Much of it will happen or is already happening, but some of it just may not pan out. So, just that's all I'd like to say as well. Just take everything with a grain of salt that Tesla's saying. They all intend to do it. I'm sure they intend to do this stuff, but some of it likely won't pan out.
So I think the other comment or category, we had the good, the bad, and the confusing. One of the confusing things to me was like I felt certain they were going to talk about hardware 4, and then they
Hmm.
didn't. They really hardly spoke about FSD at all, which we just had AI day, so maybe that's understandable. But it seems so strange to me that they didn't mention hardware 4 at all, and now we learn like a week later that they're rolling it out already. Like hardware 4 is being delivered
Yeah.
to a lot of customers. What do you make of that?
Yeah, it's confusing. I think it has to do with Tesla doesn't want to Osborne their current vehicles. I mean, Elon, and it's true, like they're always improving Teslas. There's no year. models. They don't want to do things by year, every 3 months or 6 months, or some kind of improvement that consumers would care about and wait for. But if you kind of talked about it a lot, then it would make some consumers just indefinitely wait for the newest version. They would never buy a Tesla, and I think that's
Yeah.
a little bit of a concern, and they don't want people to act that way, because there's always going to be a newer Tesla right around the corner that's with a new hardware version, or a new battery structure that goes for more range, or a new infotainment computer that lets you do, Steam versus not being able to do Steam games. So there's just new stuff all the time. And so sometimes these new little things that we're excited about, I feel like they purposely don't talk about, even though they could, because they don't want to get too many news headlines about it to Osborne the current rate of sales for people that are going to wait for whatever that new thing is. That's my thought.
Yeah. No, I think you're probably right. I mean, there's no other reason not to do it. I mean, they have the chip, they have all the new cameras. It's not like, there was any information they needed to wait for. So,
Yeah.
and I think that was something similar, like, with the Gen 3 platform. There's a very good chance that could Osborne some of their current sales. So I think it's probably the smart thing to do, not to give too many details away. So I'm actually, even as a short term investor, I'm okay with how restrictive they were on the details around Gen 3.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the hardware 4, I guess we'll find out when they get FSD 11 gets, let out to everyone in April, that, if hardware 4 makes a difference at all or not yet. Maybe that's just going to impact future versions as well. But yeah, FSD, there was no real updates about FSD on the investor day. Um, they did show some safety statistics, though, right? Didn't they show some new safety statistics for FSD, or just Tesla cars driven with FSD, and how it's like, it was like, I forget the actual
Yeah, it
numbers, but
was
it was like
like
6 or 7 times safer.
3 million. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So why don't they, and that's perfect data to put into like a national advertising campaign. I just don't understand. It's just like they're letting misinformation, get the better of a lot of the population who has, that's what they look at, instead of the Tesla's source data on this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, when
So
like Elon's kind of dunking on Dan O'Dowd and that sort of thing, it almost makes Dan O'Dowd seem like a peer, or like that his point is valid and so is Elon's. But if you just put the stats out there, you can say, hey, listen,
yeah.
like this, we're just testing this out and it's already 7 times safer. Like I
Yeah.
could picture in my mind some amazing campaign about like a family driving and they get in an accident, and like, or they're about to get in an accident and the autopilot thing stops it, and like that would be a really eye-opening thing to a lot of people who aren't in this Tesla bubble. Or like another campaign about, you are in an accident, but because of the crumple zone being so much larger,
Yeah.
everybody can just walk away. And it's like
Yeah.
you could do a series of like 5 safety advertisements that
Yeah.
like would really like
Yeah.
open people's minds and be like, wow, I
Yeah.
had no idea Teslas were so safe.
Yeah.
So I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. It'd be great. I mean, maybe one day we can organize a fan organized commercial for, I don't know how much money it would cost, but we can get donations. Someone could organize something, and I would donate $1,000 to that. I'm sure a lot of people would donate 10 or $100. And if you get enough of us Tesla, Twitterverse people who are in agreement, put it could be $1,000,000 pretty quick, and then a couple $1,000,000, and then you get a commercial segment. And as long as you get Tesla's approval, you could just run it that way. And I bet it could drum up orders by we could improve the, $1,000,000 invested in some commercial like that could ultimately lead to a valuation of many billions higher for Tesla stock, pretty quickly, if everyone becomes more aware of the safety aspect of Tesla. It would be interesting.
Yeah, and then you had to have so much more of a backlog that you could, you know, optimize your deliveries a little bit easier. You wouldn't have to, try to match demand with supply
You wouldn't have to
so
lower prices again
precisely.
for anytime
You
soon.
wouldn't have to
Yeah.
lower prices. So yeah, I mean, which like the delivering value to customers, I've seen a lot of people who criticize the marketing as being like, oh well, like you're just taking savings away from customers and putting that in Tesla's pocket. But my point is like, which they can then use to fund their $125 billion capex plan,
Yeah.
which is like Tesla needs a lot of cash flow. So
Yeah.
like they can't be running at tight margins in order to fund the growth profile that they're after. So I really
Yeah.
think it's important for Tesla to have very significant margins going forward in order to self-fund this ambitious plan that they have.
Yeah.
So
And one
yeah,
other one other thing that you and I touched on yesterday, a theory, and this could be playing into Elon's mind. And I'm not sure whether I agree with it or not. I mean, if you look, I could see the argument to be made, and I could understand where the argument to be made on this. Maybe Elon does not want Tesla stock price to go up anytime soon. Like maybe he wants to keep progress going. He doesn't want Tesla stock to the price to go down, obviously, and make all the employees and investors upset or whatever, Or but maybe that now that he's sold all the stock he needs to as well for any time for the time being, just maybe long term he would prefer the Tesla stock to stay between $200 and $300 a share, let's say, for like the next few years, even because last time when the Tesla stock price went up, 5x in a year or two, he saw enormous amounts of talent retiring from Tesla, Tesla engineers, like, top talent probably retiring, leaving to do other things because they made X million on their stock incentive plans. And in that exodus, maybe it set Tesla back further than or it didn't let it advance as fast as otherwise it could have, So maybe he wants to keep, that from happening. And so that's one possibility we were thinking about. I don't know, people in the comments, what they think. I mean, Elon, I think, is that governing all his other decisions about what information he's releasing about on Investor Day and whether or not he wants to keep, lower prices? Do you think his desire to keep the Tesla stock price, to keep Tesla engineers with Tesla longer, do you think that desire is governing his actions on all the other stuff? I guess that's the theory.
Yeah. And I think there's certainly some validity to that. I mean, if Tesla goes up, 10x this year, you're definitely going to
Yeah.
have some people retire and move out. So,
Yeah.
like, he clearly laid out the plan for Tesla being the most valuable company in the world. So it's not like he doesn't have the same long term belief that we do. He very much does. Um, but you don't want that to happen all at once, kind of like we saw in 2020 and 2021, because that alone can disrupt your business and it makes your stock-based comp more expensive and all that. So yeah, I think there's some validity. Like I think a steady rise is going to be a lot more helpful for the company operationally than 10 years of stagnation and then like the parabolic increase
Yeah.
at the end of that decade. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's certainly a legitimate theory.
Yeah. Yeah. The only problem there is, if you try to keep Tesla depressed from rising too quickly too soon than it naturally would have if you just kind of kept the same pace of information coming out or whatnot, is that at some point the stock price will catch up to that kind of fundamental progress that's happening behind the scenes when it comes to fruition. And so at some point in the future, maybe in 3 or 4 years, if he kept it range bound 200, 300 again, then at some point it might just pop to 1,000, in 1 year again, triple in 1 year again suddenly. And that's going to be that's going to lead to another mass exodus in that year of employees who are like, oh, I've made my 10 million in retirement Tesla stock options. I'm going to leave. I don't want to work this hard anymore, So there
Yeah.
will be another, but maybe he wants full self-driving solved before then. There's probably a lot of FSD engineers that, he needs to hold on to, especially.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, all
So,
right.
so Emmett, I'm
Yeah.
I'm curious. I think if I were to replay the last 45 minutes or so, we probably come off as very bearish on like the event and the stock. How so?
Yeah.
Like objectively, we like to do things on like a numbers basis.
Yeah.
But if you were to rate the event and kind of like let's just say the event scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best. How would you rate the event?
As a long-term investor, a 7.5, I would say, maybe an 8. I don't know. As a less long-term, like, if I had just been a long-term investor and ignored all the noise of the invitation and the reveal and all that, I would say it was like an 8, right? But
Hmm.
as a given our short-term minded focus on the fund and all the hype with the invite and Elon talking about SpaceX and Boeing Company being involved, and the next gen platform information will be revealed, in the invite language, even with all that hype kind of going into it, when you put that all in the equation, I would give it like a 4, 3.5, or a 4, just because I was like, oh, there's a lot of cool stuff here for long term still, but all the short term stuff, nothing panned out for what I wanted.
Yeah.
What about you? What would you have rated it
I
as.
I'd probably
And I
give
and
it like
one thing, one caveat. The only reason in the long term I give it an 8 instead of a 10 is because I was there for Battery Day. I was there for the first AI day. I know some of these things do not come to fruition. I know that. So, they mentioned all these incredible plans, and it would be a 10 if I knew all of the stuff was already in place and coming to fruition right now. But these are their intended plans. I know like some of it is not going to happen. So that's why I give it an 8 instead of a 10, as a long-term investor. Anyway, go on.
yeah. So I'd probably give it a 7, I think. I was honestly mostly happy with it.
Hmm.
The things I didn't like, Elon's comments about lithium, I actually still really disagree with. And I'm like more than willing to admit that Elon's smarter than me and he can know this stuff. But I'm
Yeah.
listening to a lot of people within the lithium industry that are saying in the next couple of years we're fine, but in like 2026 and to 2030 there's not enough mining capacity coming online in order to feed the top of the funnel. So
Hmm.
Elon's talking all about lithium processing, and I think in the short term that is the constraint, but in the medium term I think it's definitely mining. And given the lead time of like 7 years to get a new mine approved, I think this is a legitimate risk to the long-term strategy. So I hope Elon's right about that, but I'm not convinced that he is. And he didn't expand on it. He's just like, well, mining is not the constraint, it's processing. And it's like he didn't give us any proof of why that's the case. So that I found that a little bit disappointing. I found the capital allocation strategy, which was one of the things that there were was on the invite. It was basically just, hey, we invest in building out capacity, and eventually we'll do dividends and buybacks. And it was like 2 minutes, and I was like, there
Yeah.
wasn't a whole lot of substance there, to be honest with
Yeah.
you.
That was
So I
also
found that a little
lacking.
disappointing.
Yeah.
And then the like just total lack of demand, like data points about demand, and kind of the dismissive attitude toward that I found disappointing. So those were the three, what I would say are kind of like meaty, substantive things that even as like a super bullish long term investor, like even in the long term, those things are slightly concerning to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with all that. Yeah.
But still incredibly bullish.
Yeah. You got to I mean, it's easy to, basically my default is very bullish on Tesla. And so I'm looking for the little pieces I can be negative on with it almost, that's the way to think of it. Like, I think Matt and I are both in the same camp there where overall that's our most exciting stock of this generation still. Um,
Yep.
but it's so widely accepted in our minds that way. That's our default that we're so used to that we're allowing like training ourselves to look at any little negative pieces we can find to pick at, and so we apologize if it comes off as bearish, but nothing's perfect. We're just trying to find the imperfections, I guess.